Before starting today's video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video to encourage us to provide the best. Heather Snively, at the age of 21, was elated upon discovering her pregnancy. She and her fiancé, Christopher, had been trying for a baby for some time, and upon finding out, Heather relocated from her home state of West Virginia to Oregon, where Christopher lived, in preparation for their child's arrival. By June of 2009, Heather was 8 months pregnant with a baby boy whom she planned to name Jonathan. In anticipation of the baby's arrival, Heather made intensive plans to ensure that everything her child might need was secured. While searching for affordable baby clothes, she came across Craigslist, which she believed was a miracle solution to her prenatal predicament. However, her visit to the site would lead to one of the most horrific criminal incidents in American history. During one of her Craigslist browsing sessions, Heather encountered another user named Karina Roberts, who was also searching for baby clothes. They found that they were faced with a similar issue, where some of the clothes they had purchased were not to their liking, but neither had the time nor the energy to put them up for sale again. They agreed to a simple solution to their problem and arranged a meetup to peruse each other's collections and exchange items they liked. Heather drove to Karina's home in Oregon's Washington County on the proposed day of the meetup, excited to meet another expectant mother. As Heather's due date approached, the mounting stress was undeniable. Being new to Oregon, the prospect of a new and supportive friend was deeply appealing to her. However, Karina, whom she met on Craigslist, would prove to be anything but a friend. In fact, their meeting would turn out to be the greatest mistake of Heather's young life. Initially, Karina warmly welcomed Heather into her home, and they were spotted laughing and smiling by a neighbor as they greeted each other in Karina's driveway. However, once Heather was inside the house, Karina's demeanor changed dramatically. Although it is unclear how the attack began, the assault that Heather endured was incredibly brutal. Karina attacked Heather with a collapsible baton, striking her around 30 to 40 times over the head until she collapsed to the ground. Forensic analysis later revealed that Heather had multiple bite marks on different parts of her body, indicating that at some point during the attack, Karina had dropped to the ground with Heather before savagely biting her. Karina was no kindly stranger, but rather a dangerously unhinged maniac obsessed with babies and childbirth. Once she was confident that Heather had died, she calmly retrieved a razor blade from her boyfriend's shaving kit in the kitchen. She then returned to Heather's lifeless body, knelt down beside her, and performed a makeshift cesarean section, cutting Heather open and ripping her unborn son from her womb. Karina then stuffed Heather's corpse into a crawl space beneath the house. Karina contacted her boyfriend's workplace in a state of panic, insisting that he come home immediately. Her boyfriend, Bjorn Schubin, was no stranger to Karina's unhealthy fixation with having children, but to him, it was a tragic result of the stillbirth she had experienced 2 years prior. So when Karina announced that she was pregnant with twins in November of 2008, he was thrilled and watched as she meticulously prepared for their arrival. She watched countless YouTube videos for tips on a smooth birth process, and Jan even bought her knitting supplies to make baby clothes. She took prenatal vitamins, claimed to attend ultrasound appointments, and even participated in several midwife classes in case she had to give birth at home. The only issue was that Karina wasn't actually pregnant. 8 months after she began her lies, she had everything she needed to become a new mother except for a child. Around 2:30 p.m., Theon was informed that Karina had an emergency, and upon arriving home, he found his girlfriend in the bathtub holding the lifeless infant. Theon did everything he could to save the baby, even attempting CPR on the tiny bloody fetus, but it was no use. The child had passed, and Theon, still unaware of the truth, grieved for the loss of the baby he believed was his. He then contacted local paramedics, and upon seeing the amount of blood around the house, they rushed Karina and the lifeless child to Providence St. Vincent Medical Center. As the cause of the child's death was unknown, local police were called in as a matter of protocol, although there were no formal accusations at that stage. The summoning of law enforcement was standard procedure in such cases, although it was extremely distressing for everyone involved. Upon arrival, Karina was heavily sedated, and Jan informed the officers that to his knowledge, Karina had been pregnant with twins. This meant that there was a second, supposedly stillborn child in Jan's residence that needed to be retrieved. 2 officers drove over to Jan's home to conduct a search. Shortly after they left, Karina's sedation wore off, and a team of doctors attempted to examine her. However, she became extremely distressed and refused to be examined, claiming she would sue the hospital if they touched her. It took some time, but eventually, doctors were able to examine Karina, only to find that she had not given birth at all. The doctors then informed Jan of this unexpected and alarming fact, and he was confused and horrified. When Jan confronted Karina, she made a chilling confession, telling him the horrifying story of how she had murdered the pregnant Heather before slicing the baby from her womb. Meanwhile, police officers searched high and low for signs of the second deceased infant, and after receiving an order to search the crawl space beneath the house, they made the harrowing discovery of the body of the formerly pregnant woman. It was then that they realized what Karina had done. Upon their return to the hospital, the officers confirmed that there was no second child, only one who had been violently taken from his mother's lifeless body. Karina Roberts was immediately arrested on suspicion of murdering Heather Snively. It may surprise some to learn that Karina was not charged with the murder of Heather's unborn son. According to Oregon state law, a human being is only considered a person once they have been born and are alive at the time of the criminal act. Since it was impossible to prove that baby John was alive in the moments after he was forcibly removed from the womb, the state did not pursue any additional murder charges against Karina. During their investigation, the police discovered that Karina had attempted to contact several pregnant women through various social media platforms, including Craigslist. She had made arrangements with 3 of them, but 2 had failed to show up. Heather was the third, and tragically, she paid with her life for trusting Karina. At her initial court hearing in August of 2009, Karina sobbed as the accusations were read out, initially denying that she had murdered Heather. However, the following year, when it became clear that prosecutors were seeking the death penalty, she came clean and pleaded guilty to 1 count of aggravated murder. Her frank admission meant that there was no trial, and a judge subsequently sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Although Karina's defense attorneys attempted to secure eventual parole, the state's prosecutor rightly argued that a person capable of murdering a pregnant woman had no place in free society. George Weber was born on March 23, 1961, in Philadelphia. He developed a passion for talk radio at a young age and dreamt of working in the industry. For several years, he lived his dream by working at the WABC 77 morning show, where he read periodic news updates and engaged in discussions with the hosts. George moved to the ABC radio network in April 2008, focusing on local interest stories he personally investigated for the next 11 months. Although he led a quiet and unassuming life, his co-workers became concerned when he failed to show up for work on March 21, 2009. They contacted the police, who discovered that George's private life was different from his public persona. On Sunday, March 22, 2 patrol officers arrived at George's apartment at around 8:30 a.m. They heard running water and no response from George, raising suspicions. After 15 to 20 minutes, they forced their way into his apartment and found George lying naked on his bedroom floor in a pool of his own blood. His arms and legs were bound tightly with rope, and he had around 50 stab wounds to his neck, chest, and arms. The scene was horrifying. The sound of running water was heard from the bathroom of the apartment, and the blood around the sinks and taps suggested that the killer had tried to wash off before leaving during the night. Upon examining the crime scene, the attending officers found no signs of forced entry, leading them to believe that Weber had known and trusted his attacker enough to allow them into his home. With this in mind, homicide detectives searched Weber's computer and phone for evidence of grudges or arguments with his friends or neighbors. During their search, they discovered a message exchange between Weber and a 16-year-old high school student named John Cathays. Text messages and call logs from Weber's phone indicated that he and Cathays had arranged to meet on the night of March 20th for less than honorable purposes. Cathays had met Weber after he had posted an ad on Craigslist seeking a night of passion with a younger man, and the timing of their exchanges suggested that Cathays may have been one of the last people to see Weber alive. However, when police attempted to question Cathays, they discovered that he was unwilling to cooperate. A deeper investigation into Cathays' background revealed that he was a self-declared Satanist with a love for extreme sadism, as per his social media profiles. When contacted, Cathays' family confirmed that he was a deeply troubled young man. Cathays' father agreed to participate in a sting operation to bring his son to justice. He contacted Cathays and convinced him to return home to collect $300. When Cathays arrived, he was promptly arrested. At his trial, he was charged as an adult and found guilty of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. After his imprisonment, the investigation continued to determine if anyone else was involved in the murder. Some true crime enthusiasts used the case of Cathays to illustrate a lethal hate crime against gay men, where the offender exhibited some degree of homosexuality. They viewed it as a crime of projected self-hatred. However, others saw George Weber's murder as something even more disturbing. They contended that Cathays had targeted a vulnerable, older man to gain entry to his home. Under the guise of a sexual game, Cathays was able to tie up his intended victim before sacrificing him in the name of Satan. Some argued that Cathays killed George because he was a child abuser, and that Cathays' involvement with George was merely a sting operation to catch and punish someone willing to sleep with an underage boy. It is nearly impossible to substantiate any of these theories as fact, and Cathays' lawyer argued in court that George and his client were involved in a long-term but violently unstable relationship. Regardless of the truth, the judge and jury showed no leniency towards the 16-year-old who was sentenced to spend the rest of his youth in a federal correctional facility. Perhaps one day, John Cathays will provide a satisfactory explanation for why he killed George Weber. However, it is equally probable that the Weber family will forever be in the dark about why their loved one had to die. Back when the 3 pounds was first released, I really wanted one. I was desperate to play Call of Duty 3, which is still my favorite game series to date. However, since I foolishly didn't pre-order one, I was out of luck when it came to the actual release date. I remember constantly monitoring eBay and scouring Craigslist every day. Day after day went by, and I had no luck whatsoever. Then suddenly, I saw a post on Craigslist from a guy who was selling his brand new PlayStation 3, with Call of Duty 3 included. He was selling both for $400, which was at least $100 less than the asking price. The only catch was that he needed to sell it ASAP, and he needed someone to pick it up in person and pay his asking price. Somehow, I got lucky. A lot of people were messaging him about it, and it sounded like they were planning to rob him. But I was older than most of the wannabe buyers, so I could text him a picture of the cash and drive over to the Walmart parking lot that night to pick it up. I felt like a kid on Christmas, even though most kids don't drive to Santa and pay him $400 to get their presents. However, the guy was working late that night, so I had to drive to the Walmart parking lot at 2 in the morning to pick it up. I know what you're thinking. Walmart parking lot at 2 a.m. Something bad was bound to happen. And yes, I'd be lying if I said the thought hadn't crossed my mind, but I made myself clear from the beginning. I wanted that stupid World War II game, and my desire for it outweighed any good sense I had. That's how I ended up in the Walmart parking lot in South Hanover, long after dark. As I mentioned before, there was always a chance that something bad might happen, but I assumed it would come from the other side of the law. I was just sitting there daydreaming when I heard a tapping on my driver's side window. When I looked up, I saw a gun pointed at me. I thought I was being carjacked or something. They pulled me out of the car at gunpoint, but when I saw the badge on the plainclothes officer's belt, I breathed a sigh of relief. At first, I knew my reason for being there sounded sketchy. Picking up a PlayStation 3 at 2 in the morning, which would have sounded really suspicious if I was a cop. But when they confiscated the $400 in cash from my wallet and said they suspected it was drug money, I got really angry. I told them to search my car for drugs or guns or whatever they were looking for. If they didn't find anything, they had no right to take my money. One of the cops smirked at me when I said that, screaming in my face and threatening to hit me. His partner had to calm him down as if he was genuinely concerned he was going to punch me. The angry cop went back to their unmarked car, and the other cop wrote up a ticket for the cash they took. While doing that, he apologized for his partner's behavior and promised that if I brought some pay stubs to the precinct, I would get all my money back with no problem. I was angry, and I would probably miss out on the PlayStation, but I figured the officers were just doing their jobs. Having my money taken by them was much better than being robbed and carjacked by other criminals who wouldn't have been so hesitant to beat me down. Plus, I still thought I could get my hands on the PlayStation. The day after the incident, I went to the precinct with some pay stubs, hoping to get my confiscated money back. As soon as I handed in the ticket, an officer came out with an evidence bag and placed it in front of me. However, when I counted the money, I found only $100 inside. I protested, explaining that the cops had taken exactly $400 from me. The officer showed me the ticket, which listed the confiscated items as $100 instead of $400. I was outraged and demanded complaint forms and phone numbers to call. The officer thought I was just disputing the amount, but I insisted that I had more money than that. Eventually, she gave me a number to register a complaint. I knew that police corruption in Baltimore was not uncommon, but what really scared me was what happened a few days later. When I came home from work, I saw a car parked across the street that I didn't recognize. At first, I didn't think much of it, but then I saw the same plainclothes cop who had taken my money. He looked at me and smiled before driving away. It was a clear warning that he knew I had made a complaint. It shook me to the core, because when the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones threatening you, who do you turn to? Thank you for watching today's video. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and sharing it to support me. The best is yet to come.